And I know there's quite a few people who are planning to join. So I think we give it another minute or two. Is Aisha joining?
She is, but I know that she was just taking care of kids' dinner right now, so I think she may be running late.
Okay. Yeah, it's quite late in Singapore, right?
Yeah,
8:30.
it's 8:30. But just guys, for those of you who are here, and for those of you who've joined for the first time, Latifah and I have been hosting these sessions for the last month and a half. We get together on Mondays. We basically brought this to kind of in the spirit of kind of creating a community where all of us can kind of share as we're going through and dealing with our own stresses and these trying times. So every week we pick a topic that we think may be relevant and interesting, and we discuss it. Latifah gives her insight on it, and we address a lot of your questions. This series that we are going to talk about today, the Mirror Mirror series, started last week. And we'll kind of get into that, and we're going to have another session next week as well. But I do want to point out, guys, that next in June, we're planning on hosting a workshop which kind of dives much deeper into understanding personalities, the archetypes, the shadows, the defense mechanisms that Latifah and I will be hosting, and we'll send out the information as well. So that will be a special workshop we're doing next month. So if you are interested, let us know. So we have you on our list where we can share this with.
And this is going to be a longer one, right? So these will be like 1 hour sessions. So
right.
Longer.
So actually, the Mirror Mirror one is a 2 hour workshop, but done over 2 days, so an hour long. Yeah.
And I guess we'll start in about a minute or so. So what Rabi and I were chatting about just before we everyone signed in was, please guys, we welcome suggestions from all of you as to the topics that you would be interested in hearing about, because we want it to be relevant and we want it to be something that's engaging for you. So we welcome suggestions. If you can tell us this is something that I think would be quite relevant, we definitely look into those particular topics. So whether it's at the end of the chat or just privately messaging us, that would be great.
Yeah. So do you think, Latifah, we should get started?
I think we should get started.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you once again for joining us. This is part of our weekly Monday chats that Latifah and I have organized for you guys. Hi, Latifah. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Rabi. How are you?
Wonderful. I hope all of you are doing really well as well. In most places, I believe the lockdowns are kind of coming off now. We here in Singapore are still going on strong. I think it's going to last till June. But once again, I hope you guys are staying home, staying safe, and practicing social distancing. So guys, just to do a little recap for those of you who are joining in today, from last week. So Latifah and I started the series called Mirror Mirror, which is basically about developing a deeper understanding of your personalities. So our various personalities, we talked about the importance of why it's important to understand our personalities, not within just ourselves, but also be able to and analyze our own behaviors, but also be able to understand our relationships better. I think that's one of the biggest reasons for having personality. Would you agree with that, Latifah?
Absolutely. There's a famous Chinese philosopher called Sun Tzu, and his famous book, The Art of War, when he said that not knowing ourselves and not knowing others in every battle, certain loss. And I think that applies. We're not in a battle in our daily lives, but I think it applies to everything that we do. Is that it's so important to understand ourselves and use that understanding of ourselves to understand other people. Otherwise, how are we having relationships?
Absolutely. We also had a discussion about the whole nature nurture issue, right? So we talked about whether it is something that's inherited, our personality, or whether it's about we pick up our personality based on the environment. And our conclusion was that it's a combination of both. I guess it's a long debate that's been going on for I would say decades now, which is nature versus nurture. Latifah, do you want to give your brief input on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had quite a long discussion on that last week. but it's an ongoing discussion in behavioral psychologists, in all areas of psychology, psychiatry, and even in sociology, is the whole nature nurture debate. We spoke about last week the fact that the only way to really understand this is to look at identical twins who are reared apart, and to see whether nurture, which means your environment, has an impact. And they definitely found that there were elements that were similar in twins, but the environment played a huge role in shaping the whole personality. So I think there is definitely a strong case to be made that your environment will definitely take something that may be not the best platform, but make it into something better. And the implications of that, I think, are huge for parents, because it also implies that the environment that you create for your children is really going to set a really good stage for how they're going to navigate the rest of their lives. So while your genetics are going to give them something, the way you create environments for them is definitely going to shape the real outer edges of their personality.
Absolutely. And it made me think about something, Latifah. Again, there's a belief that, like, when we start identifying things that we need to work on within ourselves, and we start making those changes within ourselves, then especially as a parent, I feel like that we see that impact in the kids as well, right? So we talked about even from an energy perspective, or genetically, when you unblock it within yourself, then you see that behavioral change in your kids. And I believe that it would also be because you start nurturing them in a different way, right? Like, so the way you parent obviously has an impact on them as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, we touched a little bit of this on this in our parenting session, but it's definitely a case of, if you want to raise children who are highly evolved and more successful in the world, then be the best version of yourself. Yeah. So if you can do the work on yourself, systems theory and the law of equilibrium states that if one part of a system changes and goes back in the system will naturally adjust to accommodate that change. So don't keep shouting at everyone in your environment. Don't keep arguing with your spouse that he needs to change, or arguing with your kids. Change yourself. That's the one thing you have control over. And that's why we're doing these series. Understand yourself better, work on the areas that are not working for you, and you will actually see amazing change happening in your family system and even in your other relationships.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a very important point that we touched upon was this concept of a shadow. So we spoke about the archetypes, and the two specific archetypes with the lover and the warrior that we talked about, which I think Latifah will give you a little brief on that. But we talked about the concept of shadow, which again, my understanding, Latifah, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that these are aspects of our personality that we have, but we probably deny them within ourselves. And so the moment we see the shadow personality in somebody else, this is what causes us to get triggered. And it's essentially what we're doing is we're basically just mirroring it. And these are just aspects of our own personality. Would you like to expand on that a little bit?
And again, not to take too much of time, but just to simply say that, I think Carl Jung was actually the person who came up with the concept of the shadow in our personality. And it is probably one of the most important aspects of your personality to understand, because it's the one that gets us into trouble. So it's an element of who we are that we deny because we're not comfortable with it, or we reject it because we think it shows weakness in us. And when we are confronted with someone who is a representation of our shadow, we get into conflict with that person simply because we're in conflict with ourselves. And we wonder why we butt heads with that particular child all the time. We butt heads with that particular colleague. That feeling of, oh, this person rubs me up the wrong way. And you don't really understand why. But that's because it's an element of you that you don't want to look in. And this person is bringing a magnifying glass right up to your face saying, look. Okay, so it's really, really important for us to integrate these elements of our personality so that we can have more whole and effective relationships with people.
Absolutely. And so last time, and just briefly before we get into our archetypes for this week, last week, actually it stirred a lot of debate, and I got a whole stream of messages later on, even after our call. We talked about the lover and the warrior. So one question that came up a lot was, how can we have multiple archetypes within us? And the answer is yes, that we can, right? So people said, I don't think I am one single, I see myself as a lover, but I see myself as a warrior. And I would say, an example of both a lover and a warrior. Latifah, would you agree? So perhaps, Latifah, if you can just give us a brief overview for those of us who are joining today on who the lover is and who the warrior is.
Okay, so, not wanting to do a full recap and simply to say the lover is the one who's all about relationships, who's all about connecting with people, and also wanting to make sure that people are happy and that they want to spread that happiness with everybody. And the warrior, on the other hand, is the one who wants to be the conqueror and the hero who wants to save the world, and who is actually the more courageous, but it comes at a risk. So often the lover and the warrior archetypes are in conflict with each other, because the warrior, if your dominant archetype is a warrior, you feel that a shadow is your weakness. Your lover shadow is your weakness, hence it becomes your shadow. Now, if you, like somebody like Rabi, who would say that I think I am a combination of warrior and lover, simply means that probably lover at some point was your shadow, and you've probably integrated it into your personality and become more comfortable with it. To quickly answer the other person's question, which was, can we have multiple archetypes? Well, Jung says that all the archetypes, which are blueprints for our personality, exist in all of us. So all the blueprints for personality exist in all of us, but one of them dominates to give us our actual personality. So we'll be able to recognize someone as a different archetype simply because there are dominant features that give us our unique personality. Now we call them by different names in lay people's terms. Oh, that person is just, he's so egocentric, or he's so full of himself. And we use different terminologies. All Jung has done is package them into his archetypes. And today we're going to talk about two interesting ones as well.
So let's get to today's topic. So today we're talking about the king and queen, and we're talking about the orphan. So very intriguingly, tell us a little bit more about who the king and queen is.
Okay, so the king and queen is an interesting archetype because it can also be called the boss, the leader, or the ruler, right? So depending on which are the different authors that are writing about it, and I think the term and the label itself will give us a very good idea what this archetype is all about. So guys, as I'm describing it, I want you to either tick certain boxes in your mind going, that's me, or no, maybe that's not me. So, as the term implies, the motto for the king and queen archetype is that power is not everything, it is the only thing. Okay, so the driving force for people who have a king-queen archetype is really power. And their goal is to create prosperous and successful communities, or prosperous and successful family, or an organization, right? So it depends who your community around you is. Hence why we call it the king-queen archetype, is that they really want to create prosperity and they really want to create success in the actual community, be it their micro family unit or their macro community organization. And the strategy that they use, so a person who has a king-queen archetype, is that they will use their power and they will exercise their power to ensure that people around them will create whatever situation in order to create the success for them. So they will use their power on, if you can call them their subjects, in order to make sure that this successful or prosperous environment is created. Now, it's very easy to see how if you have a mother or a father figure in a home who has the king-queen archetype, who exercises power a lot because they see that our family needs to be prosperous and successful, and this is how I define it, they will use a lot of prescriptive, directive methodology in order to get that outcome, and it's not always the best one. Okay? Please go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on.
But like with all the archetypes or personality types, they all have an element of fear in them, and the greatest fear is obviously that there is chaos in the environment for the king-queen archetype, or that they will be overthrown or dethroned. All right, so they will exercise, they will protect this in a very, very strong way to ensure that they maintain the control and the power. Now, I think that those of you who work for our organizations, you have a boss, I think it's very easy to see that some of you are working for bosses who are exactly like this and probably nodding and smiling. One of the weaknesses of the king-queen archetype is that they can be extremely authoritarian. So they're extremely controlling. They will delegate very harshly if they ever do, but they will struggle to delegate because they struggle to trust. Because that ultimate goal is defined and it's very clear in their minds, it's very important for them to achieve it at any cost, even if they have to do all the work themselves, or they will be extremely harsh with the people that they demand this from, and that will make them not as popular as they possibly could be.
So the whole concept of my way or the highway, when people say, is would be the king and queen. Latifah, as you're kind of describing it, last week we talked about the warrior, and you said the warrior are usually people who are CEOs or the leadership also in firms, right? And they are essentially the doers. Tell us what the difference between the warrior versus the king and queen is.
So, the difference between the warrior and the king and queen is that the warrior operates on a motto of being courageous, and by actually exercising courage to go and stretch themselves, take risks, and do things to prove that they are worthy and that they have courage. The king-queen archetype operates in a position of power. The warrior does not necessarily seek power in order to achieve their goals. They have it as a side effect, okay? Whereas for a king and queen archetype, power is a main effect, right? And essentially that's the difference. So when you end up with a warrior archetype as a leader, this is a really good leader to have. This leader is the one who is going to take risks and drag you along with them and stand up for you, stand with you, fight with you, and make sure that you, together with them, will achieve something. Unlikely to happen that much in a king-queen archetype, where it's about me and it's about what I want and my goal. And at the end of the day, it's about my power, and I'm not going to dilute it.
In what cases does the king and queen personality actually come across as a positive?
I think when a person who has a king-queen personality, who is able to strike a nice balance between power because somebody needs to be in control, and a nice balance between having authoritarianism, but balancing that with very nice elements of a lover archetype. So having a nice, not being overwhelmed by power, and being able to find a nice balance between how I exercise this power to achieve a good for everybody.
So Latifah, what if somebody has, and of course, you know what I'm trying to do over here, right? I'm just trying to self-analyze myself with all of you over here.
I'm quite aware of that. Yeah.
But what if you have the king and queen as your shadow? So how does that shadow behave?
So it's not very common to have a king and queen as a shadow personality. Okay. Sometimes there will be a flip around where a person has seen that this has had a really negative impact on them in their lives, and they completely withdraw it. They become a lover archetype, the ruler archetype. It's actually a very disempowering experience. So for a person to have a king queen as a shadow and suppress it, the person's personality will not evolve into something that is extremely strong, because the flip side to having a king queen archetype oftentimes will be a lover archetype, and this may come across as a person whose personality is not as strong or a little bit more diluted. And this is also someone who is not comfortable with their power, who feels that their power is something that is negative because they've probably had role models of people who have abused their power, so strong king-queen archetypes, and therefore they miss opportunities to actually take on leadership roles because they reject this so well, and it's actually doing yourself a disservice.
Latifah, I was actually talking to somebody after a session last week, and the lady was very intrigued by, and really she said that it really gave her an aha moment after we spoke about the warrior and the lover, because she was able to identify and realize what her personality has been, and hence she was able to do what most of us will do, is immediately start assessing what your partner is, and so. And in that debate or in that conversation, something came up which I think will lead to this conversation, because she said that, I realized for the longest time, because she was a very strong lover and a warrior, and she said for the longest time I projected my husband, my partner, to be perhaps a lover. But she said, now that I'm kind of thinking about it, and in the conversation, she said, his personality is a lot more. And again, this is something that he probably doesn't accept in himself, but he is very king and queen, which is like, it needs to happen in his way, but he's not comfortable with admitting to that king and queen. you know. But instead, what he's always kind of playing the role of is the victim. Oh, I don't really need money, but, or I don't really need to take leadership. I do it for other people, but it's actually all kind of driven by his own need for power. But yet he's not very accepting himself, or recognizing that he's actually the king and queen, or like he's actually the leader. So tell us, is that what an orphan is? Or I was just trying to lead into what would that be?
Orphan is a little bit different to that, but I just want to close that before we start talking about the orphan. I think you brought up a really important point. Guys, this is not a box. Your personality is not a box. You are not the king and queen is not the whole of who you are. It's merely a label that will direct you to understand and probably make sense a little bit of the certain very overt elements of your personality. But I think we really need to caution ourselves when we start trying to analyze other people as well, is trying to figure out that, for example, the whole process of understanding your personality and integrating elements of your personality is finding acceptance of certain elements of yourself that maybe you don't like, or maybe you think are not good. Because when you find acceptance, you actually find ways to express those in a better way. Right? So the more I reject an element of my personality, for example, the more he rejects the king queen and becomes more of his shadow, the more it actually shows him in a very negative light, because your shadow is very visible to other people.
Right.
So it's much more healthy for you to look in the mirror, integrate that element of your personality, find ways to accept it, and then strike a balance between that element of your personality and your key archetype. And that's when you will be gaining real success. And that's the process of a lot of therapeutic intervention. So people who do very Jungian style therapy will definitely work in this way. You will probably find that today most psychologists that you go and see use a very eclectic method of actually working with people, so it won't be purely Jungian. So if you're struggling with elements of yourself, it may not be particularly just your shadow. It may be, we're going to get into it in a moment, your defense mechanisms of having repressed experiences that are creating problems for you. You need to go and talk to someone about it so that you can actually help yourself to integrate both elements of your personality and elements of your experience into a very well-rounded, healthy personality.
So why would and not to harp on this particular example, but it just kind of intrigues me a little bit as to why the person would be operating from such an opposite stance. Instead of operating from the king and queen, he's operating from a victim mode, which is a complete opposite.
I think it's so common in so many people why a dominant personality ends up in a shadow, because they've had an experience where they were not able to express this in a healthy way. They got really bad feedback or really bad experience as a result of it, and then rejected the whole element of your personality. So instead of working on maybe trimming the edges of it, it gets rejected completely. And my sense is that this is probably what has happened. The person had a big loss or had a huge negative impact as a result of this personality being in the forefront, and then for some reason started pushing it into their shadow.
Makes sense. So tell us more about the orphan personality.
So, the orphan personality is very interesting. And it's also, again, like I keep saying, we have certain ones that are very common. And really the orphan is also known as the regular guy or person, the regular person. Okay. And that's the orphan archetype. And their core desire is to connect with other people. And their goal is to actually belong. So, the orphan archetype is really all about belongingness. And what their greatest fear is that they will be left out or left alone, and they will stand out from the crowd. And the orphan personality just wants to be part of the herd. They don't want to be very visible. They're definitely not the king and queen. They just want to be part of a group. And their strategy is that they really want to work on developing very strong values, very strong virtues, and be very down to earth and really have a very common touch. So, those people that we call the salt of the earth people, those people that are, the real, we call them the real earthy types, the real straightforward, what you see is what you get types. This is the orphan personality. The problem with this personality is that because they are so determined to blend in, to make sure that they are part of a community or part of a crowd, that they will often, lose sight of themselves or lose touch with themselves in their effort to make sure that they blend in. So they will end up with a lot of superficial relationships simply because they want to blend in at the cost of what their core desires or what their soul needs. So, but orphans are very talented because you will often get real truth from an orphan personality. So a regular guy, regular girl is also what the orphan is known as. So there's a lack of pretentiousness in orphan personalities. They have a high degree of empathy, but they have no pretension. So what you see is what you get.
And what would be the main difference between the orphan and the lover? Because I see some overlap there.
Absolutely. There's definitely a lover and there's definitely an overlap between the orphan and the lover. But the difference with the orphan is that they want to be a regular person. They want to be part of a crowd. But the lover actually seeks intimacy. They actually seek a much more intimate connection. And they don't just want to be alone. They want to be loved. All right. And that's the difference. So they will show a lot of that outward affection, and they will actually give a lot of themselves much more than the orphan would, because they're seeking a lot of love and intimacy. The orphan is not. The orphan is simply seeking connection.
Somebody asked, why is it called the hero? So the hero is also the
warrior.
Warrior, yeah. So the warrior is synonymous of the hero, not the lover, guys. Just to come.
The hero is synonymous with the warrior.
I just had to put it on mute. Okay. So just a quick question, Latifah. So when you talk about kind of like the more like the herd mentality, wanting to belong, but does that mean that they're repressing their dominant personality? Because doesn't everybody have a certain dominant personality, that aspect of their personality that comes up, and they're trying to repress that to then belong to and become the average Joe?
So I think what you're missing is that there are a lot of people who are very, very, very okay with being average and being part of a crowd and not wanting to stand out. And I don't think they're suppressing anything. I think that's why we have a crowd. If everybody wanted to dominate, then we'd have a whole lot of, chiefs and absolutely no subjects, right? So there are huge, and I always say that one of my biggest fears in life is mediocrity. Okay, so I just, for me, if I'm told that if my life is mediocre, if I'm told that I'm mediocre, it's a huge issue for me. But I've come to learn over the years that mediocre is okay for a lot of people, and I think mediocre is stable, mediocre is secure, and a lot of people are okay with that. They're just getting on with it, and they're just getting on with their lives.
I think you're so right. I think the way our society has kind of labeled it, because they want to make everybody like the rah 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 within us, and I think you're right. And I think the biggest advantage would be what you said is about having consistency. I think people, the orphans probably have a lot more consistency in their lives than a lot of the very strongly dominant other personalities.
I think the way I can also, describe it is that I think the orphan personality does not seek out peak experiences. Okay, they seek out more stable, consistent, as you mentioned, experiences. And I think the analogy that I can draw is that, suddenly the world has spun on its axis. Suddenly all the actors and all the fashion bloggers and all the designers are no longer the heroes of the world and no longer the people that everybody is looking at, but we're looking not even at the doctors, because, when you work in a hospital, you learn very quickly that in a hospital, there are gods, and then there are demigods, and then there are, maybe, and then there are everybody else, and then, I think, Veena, you can relate to that. So, you have the surgeons, and then the neurosurgeons and the cardiologists who think that they are the gods, and then everybody else comes underneath. And I think the forgotten people in healthcare are the nurses, right? Wow. And I really think that if you're looking at archetypes, this is where the orphan archetype resonates. And I've been watching interviews of, when the nurses in the healthcare homes in the UK and in the care homes in the UK are being interviewed. And I really think there's such an absence of ego. These people just want to do good. They want to connect. They want to be part of a community, and they want to serve the community. And I think there is a huge population of people who contribute a very valuable layer to society. And therefore, I think this is a very beautiful archetype, which we kind of miss.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So, Latifah, today we will also talk about. You said something else, which is our defense mechanisms, right? So help us understand what are defense mechanisms.
So, the reason why I just wanted to touch on this a little bit today is because last week we spoke about the shadow, right? And we spoke about how much the shadow impacts on the relationships that we have. But I think there is and all of that falls in the realm of Jung. But let's switch a little bit to Freud, because defense mechanisms are a lot of what Freud actually spoke about. And defense mechanisms are really the behaviors that we use to separate ourselves from unpleasant thoughts or unpleasant actions or unpleasant things. So these are strategies that we use to put a distance between ourselves and things that we feel are unwanted feelings or unwanted experiences that we have. So they are very powerful tools,
Yeah.
and we all have them. We all have defense mechanisms. Freud said that defense mechanisms help us to survive in our world. They help us to survive, and hence, when we experience someone, and we take note of somebody's defense mechanisms, we shouldn't try to completely remove them from the person because we leave them naked to the world. Some defense mechanisms are powerful and positive, and they serve a very good purpose, but some of them are harmful. So it's really important for us to distinguish between which are my defense mechanisms that are helpful and which are harmful to me. All right. So this is why I wanted to bring those in, because I think it resonates very nicely with the shadow.
I think perhaps again exposing too much of myself here as well, but I think one of my pet peeves is the defense mechanism that a lot of people end up using is denial, right? So and maybe perhaps you can kind of go into some of these defense mechanisms, but I know that there are sometimes I know people who are very close to me as well, like which the moment when something is very uncomfortable or they're kind of put out of their own comfort zone, the immediate is to deny that situation, and somehow that helps them cope with it. Would denial be considered a defense mechanism?
Denial is probably the number one defense mechanism. It's probably the most commonly used defense mechanism of the 10 defense
That's
mechanisms
me.
we have. It is. And the problem is that I think it requires a certain degree of empathy when we deal with people. Denial is something we all use. It is a powerful coping mechanism. It is the coping mechanism against pain. And it's one of the biggest coping mechanisms that we have against pain. That is why in a grieving process, in the stages of grief, denial is probably the first stage of grieving, right? Because it's how we shield ourselves against emotions that threaten to overwhelm us. That's what defense mechanisms do. They help us, they become our defense against whatever may feel like it's going to overwhelm us. So denial is a very powerful tool. It's when a person gets stuck in a cycle of denial and is trapped in there and not able to remove themselves, that's when it becomes pathological.
Yeah.
So when you with your friends are experiencing people who are in denial about certain things, I think it's important to have a conversation around why are you not able to accept this? What would happen if you were to accept this truth and have that conversation with this person? Because you would then probably get an idea of what their fears are and what their anxieties are.
Sure.
Okay. So, and I think we all use it. I think it's a very powerful tool, and it's a very self-preserving tool.
Right. If somebody asked the question, are defense mechanisms, how are they different from coping mechanisms? I think you just answered that, which is that they're one of the same, right? Your defense mechanism is your coping mechanism as well.
So you have positive coping mechanisms, which are not defense mechanisms. They're just pure coping mechanisms. So one of my coping mechanisms against stress, for example, would be to go and work out. Okay. So that's a coping tool, right? But a defense mechanism is another coping tool, like smoking is a coping tool. It's not a good one. Right? So we have different coping tools that we use for different aspects of our life, and defense mechanisms are bred into the way our brain deals with situations. I think it leads me very nicely into my favorite one, and we're going to just deal with these two, I think, today, because we don't want to run out of time, which is repression. And I think we're all familiar with the term depression, right? And I think we've all been experiencing elements of it in this lockdown. But repression is a very interesting term that Freud talks about when we take, we take aspects of situations or events that we can't deal with, and we plug them very deep into our subconscious mind. So this is different to denial. So repression is when I take events and I take memories and I take experiences and I plug them into my subconscious mind, and then I tell myself that I've dealt with it. Right? So I've repressed the memory. I've dealt with it. Now, in my years of practicing, I find that men are brilliant with repression. I don't want to sound sexist in this, but honestly, men are just amazing with repression. They will come to me and tell me, I've dealt with it. I'm fine. You know, and I'm like, yes, I'm sure you are. And 3 months later, you have a complete meltdown. Okay? The thing that I always speak about is repression. The material that we repress into our subconscious mind, which is the part of us that we don't have awareness of except when we're sleeping. Your subconscious is not the Bermuda Triangle. Information does not go in there never to be seen again. Okay. It is a permeable place. And what happens is that my brain will repress information, experiences, memories, because it feels that if I had to deal with it right now, I will be overwhelmed by it. So it plugs it into my subconscious mind. And then the most amazing thing that happens is that I can repress material for 10 years, all right? Because my brain feels that this is not the time, I'm not strong enough to deal with this. And then 10 years later, my life is in a great place. I've got everything together. And then one day I wake up and boom, I start having all these memories about this horrible experience. And I am completely floored because I'm like, what? How on earth is this happening now? And that's purely because your brain now feels that you're in a safe place, that you have in a stronger place. And now it's okay for repressed material to seep into consciousness. Okay. So while it's a very powerful defense mechanism, it is also a very dangerous one if you don't go and revisit the material that you've repressed.
Absolutely. So Latifah, so just so that I can gain a better understanding, is what you're saying is whether it's denial. So denial is very momentary, right? So I'm denying situation right now, but I will have to kind of deal with it. Repression is I've repressed it for years, and then when I'm ready to heal and deal with that situation, the situation will immerse, and then I'll have to kind of deal with it. Is that like is
yes,
denial
is a lot more surface? Denial is like ignoring. So there's noise and I just pretend it's not there, but taking it and putting it into a chest and locking the chest.
Okay. But I guess the importance here, guys, is that that we don't get stuck in these stages, right? So while these are our coping mechanisms to deal with our stress or our experience in that moment, whether it's through denial or repression, but we cannot kind of stay in that stage because, like Latifah said, it will come back to haunt us. So this is where I guess you need to heal yourself and you need to understand. So you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think the important takeaway has also got to be that we can only deny things for a certain period of time, and the elephants in the room eventually have to be dealt with. Okay, so we have to do that. But I think repression is a lot more complex for a lot of people. Now, you know yourself better than everyone and than anyone. If there are elements of your past that you've not dealt with, okay, and that you think, like most of the men, again, sexist comment, that come to my practice will say, I'm fine, I'm over it. I'm over the divorce. I'm over this. I'm over that. And they're all fine. And they have so many problematic relationships because they haven't dealt with it. Go and do the introspection for yourself. If there is pain that you haven't dealt with in your life, and you know that you haven't dealt with it, maybe it's time to be brave enough to open that up. You know, therapy is not about being crazy. You know, seeking help from a psychologist is not about being insane. It's about being extremely human and wanting to connect with your humanness. That's what therapy is really all about. So you don't need to go and seek out help because you think maybe you're crazy. You need to get it because you want to be better, right? Absolutely. And it takes a lot of strength to do that. So these defense mechanisms are great because you're surviving. But if you want to thrive, you actually need to do something about them.
Absolutely, Latifah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we're almost running out of time here, guys. If you have any questions, I'm going to kind of open up the floor to all of you guys. Just send me a message and I'll unmute you. I won't unmute everybody because it creates a lot of audio noise. So we were answering a lot of the questions as they were kind of coming up as well.
So, guys, we kind of fast tracked, probably 2 days worth of workshop into this conversation, but we really just wanted to give you a taster. Go away, play around with these things, go and do some introspection for yourself. Is my denial actually harming me from actually being happier than I could? Am I repressing so many things that one day I'm going to end up having to deal with all of them at the most inopportune time? Is my personality type working for me? Am I rejecting too much of it? These are the kind of questions you should be. Take this inward.
Yeah.
The temptation is always to go and start analyzing everybody in your environment. Just go inward with this. It's going to be much more useful for you.
And I think one of the biggest things is that if you see a repeated pattern in your life, guys, I think that in itself will kind of be an aha moment for you. That if you're continuing to see, won't you agree, Latifah? If you're continuing to see a repeated pattern in a relationship or something, then there's definitely stuff that you've kind of either denied or repressed that you really need to address within yourself. Rihanna is asking, why is there such a stigma around getting therapy?
I think that's an extremely good question. And I think the stigma is actually getting much less. I think we have media to thank for that as well, movies to thank for that. We had, in the old days, anytime somebody went to see a shrink, okay, it would be lie on the couch and tell me about your childhood. Okay.
Right.
So it definitely got a bad rep because people started thinking, human nature, we're all afraid of the dark because we can't see anything. All right. The unknown is always the thing we're afraid of. When I have a physical pain, it's very easy for me to go and see a doctor, right? But my emotional pain and my psychological pain is something I can deny for a very long time because I can't see what's going on there, so it scares me. And the mind is a scary place for a lot of people. So yes, there is a stigma because in the past, psychotherapy was a lot about insanity. That is not the case anymore. Psychotherapy is not about insanity. And I really challenge the whole concept of sanity and, insanity because, when we look at mental retardation, there is like a 3-point difference between somebody who is normal in terms of IQ and somebody who's mildly mentally retarded. So when it comes to brain functioning, it's all about norms. There is a huge stigma because we are afraid of things we don't understand. That's simply what it's all about. And society has often rejected populations of people because they don't understand them.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely, guys. Like Latifah's saying, it's so important. And that's why a lot of these conversations and talks that we're having as well is to basically kind of help you have that aha moment, kind of introspect, go within yourself. And again, like there's so many tools nowadays that are available for all of us to be the better version of ourselves, like Latifah says, which is to seek help, seek a psychologist. There's meditations, there's counselors, coaching, whatever mechanism works for you guys. So and especially nowadays, to use this time now to reflect where everybody's slowing down, to connect with yourself. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I think, it's so important. Rihanna, there was a stigma and there probably still always will be an element of stigma. And how I usually say to any of my clients who are afraid to come and do this, I always tell them, the person who actually picks up the phone and calls a psychologist and says, can I please come and see you, is way stronger than the person who's laughing at the person for doing it. Sure. Right? And that's something you really need to remember. It takes a huge amount of strength to look at yourself in the mirror with all the thorns that are sticking out on the side and say, you know what, I need to do something about that. So those of you who have taken that up and taken the challenge and said, I'm going to do this, don't worry about what other people say. You are way stronger than those people who laugh at it. So, just be brave.
That's true. And with that, I think we don't have any more questions, guys. Just some admin stuff. We're going to skip next Monday. We're not going to have a session next Monday because it is Eid. And so we will bring it up the following Monday. I don't have the date with me, but we'll send it out as to everybody, and we'll continue the series of Mirror, and we'll discuss the next 2 or 3 personality types and some other defense mechanisms. In the meantime, guys,
Rabi, sorry to interrupt. We're also going to revert to our pre-Ramadan times, I think.
Yes.
This is going to help people who are in Canada and US as well. I think we're going to go back to, what was it, Rabi? 5:30? 5 p.m.
5 p.m. in UAE. That's 9 p.m. here in Singapore, and 9 a.m. in North America. So for those of you who are listening, I think it will be probably a little bit more saner time, especially for the guys sitting in North America. And guys, as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to send us a message to myself or Latifah. And if you have other topics that you'd like us to discuss, please share that with us. We'd love to kind of have you guys engaged and be part of this conversation. Just one more thing, guys. We are, and I think I said that earlier, but for those of you who just joined, what we've touched upon is just kind of slightly touched upon this whole personality, archetypes, and shadows. Latifah and I have designed a program for next month, which we're going to conduct in a workshop format. So if those of you who are interested in joining, please let us know, and we'll share the details of that. So
yeah, and before we go, I wanted to leave you with something positive for the long weekend. Wish everybody Eid Mubarak, I'm sure, in advance for everyone. But I wanted to, leave you with something. It's a poem by Mary Oliver, which I really liked, and I hope you're going to like it. So Rabi, if there's nothing more, I'll go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
That is beautiful, Latifah. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
So thank you, everyone, guys. Have a great ending of Ramadan. Have a great holiday for those of you who are going to get the break for Eid. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.